Members, it's the appointed time. We have a quorum. Thank you for joining this meeting. This is a meeting of the Bills Committee on Construction Industry Security of Payment Bill. This is our first meeting. We will use the request to speak button. So once you have picked a seat, please stick to that seat. Item 1 on the agenda, election of a deputy chairman. The Secretary has circulated a notice letting members know that as at the end of the nomination period, just one valid nomination was received for the deputy chairman, and the member nominated is Mr. Chen Xiuhong. He was nominated by Mr. Lai Dongguok and seconded by me in accordance with the Regulation 80 under Appendix 4 of the House Rules. Therefore, any valid nomination received for the deputy chairperson, the Bills Committee can decide whether we need to elect a deputy chairperson. So, members, do we agree that we need a deputy chairperson? Yes. So I would declare that Mr. Chen Xiuhong is elected as the Deputy Chairperson of the Bills Committee on Construction Industry Security of Payment Bill. We now come to the meeting with the government. Will the officials now join us? The papers are set out on the agenda. The members have already pressed the request to speak button. Let's wait for the officials to join us. Good morning. We welcome the Secretary and her team. And also the drafting team. So we first invite the Secretary to brief us on the proposal. There are PowerPoint slides to go with the presentation. So let's first hear from the Secretary. Over to you. Chairman, I believe many members are already aware of the framework, but since we're at the first meeting of this Bills Committee, I want to briefly cover some points, and then my colleagues will go over the main part of the bill. As we know, construction projects cover a wide range of areas that involves many professions and trades and tasks. There are unique aspects at each layer. No single contractor or consultant can take up the entire project. So to enhance the flexibility in project procurement, local construction contractors do subcontracting very often. Across the industry chain, many parties are involved. Experience suggests when just one party defaults on payment, that creates financial pressure on everyone else along the industry chain. This is especially true for small and medium players who are less resilient in their finances. When payment issues come up, that also affects the progress of the works, and workers don't get paid on time. So the purpose of this bill is to address something on the industry chain. For every payment default or delay, we want to address this issue. We want to minimize the risks when workers' wages are in arrears. We want projects to be delivered on time. There are several major aspects to this bill. First, we want to improve the payment terms in construction contracts. And second, when disputes arise, there will be a statutory adjudication mechanism to ensure a speedy resolution of the dispute. But the use of such an adjudication mechanism is up to the claiming party. When the claiming party cannot receive the payment despite the promise from the paying party, or when we already have a determination on the amount, the money should be paid, but the claiming party has yet to get the money. The claiming party will have the right to suspend the work. Many countries such as Singapore, the UK, and Australia already have in place security of payment legislation for their construction sectors. For our bill, we broadly adopt the practice overseas. We have also consulted extensively in our own city. We have noted the feedback from our local sector, so where appropriate, we incorporated those views in our bill. In 2016, we set up this task force. Now we're in 2024. So much time has elapsed. Where we are today, we have reached a consensus. This is a hard-earned result. Last November, on the key part of the legislative proposal, we consulted the panel on development at LegCo. We received the general support of members, and members would like us to go ahead with the legislation at pace. We stress we need to get the legislation through promptly, and this matters because in the years to come, there will be a large number of projects coming up. We don't want to see a large number of payment disputes, and that will have an impact on the entire industry. Rising construction costs are also close to the heart of many people. Now, because of all those uncertainties with payment in the past, at each layer of contracts, there are clauses to guard against risks that has driven up building costs. Now, with the safeguards in place, with payment security, people are more assured. We hope that will help reduce the risk premium in construction contract. With the certainty in payment, contractors, subcontractors, and construction workers will also be able to work in a more stable environment. Since we now have this industry consensus, we want to make this start. Now over to my colleagues who will tell us more about the content of the bill. There are slides to go with the presentation. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. I now brief members on this bill with the slides. As the Secretary just said, construction projects cover a wide range of tasks that are unique. Now, to enhance the flexibility of local project procurement, the construction sector adopts subcontracting extensively. Many contracts involve huge sums. There are many stakeholders involved. They have to dip into their own funds to start the works. And then based on the contractual payment terms, those parties get paid. Now, there are long-standing issues with payments being delayed. Now, for the small and medium players with less cash, they're under greater pressure, and that also leads to delays in projects. This may also lead to wages in arrears for construction workers. To find out more about the payment situation of the local sector in 2011 and 2023, the Development Bureau hired professional consultants to conduct industry-wide surveys. The findings went like this. Each year, the outstanding payment per annum amounted to roughly 5 to 12% of the total business receipts. And this delay in payment has seen little improvement over the last decade. And we have looked at the practice of several overseas countries in construction payment security terms. Since 2012, we started a discussion on the legislative framework. We have looked at the overseas SOPL. In 2015, we conducted a public consultation. Now, some stakeholders had divergent views about certain proposals, but there was general support for legislation to ensure security of payment in construction. Now, after years of discussion, we have secured the broad consensus and support, and that covers support from owners, suppliers, contractors, subcontractors, and workers. Now, in the recent years, we have seen a large number of construction projects. In the years to come, there will be many projects as well, and large-scale projects. Early passage of this bill will reduce risks of contractors or subcontractors not getting their money. The procurement costs and building costs will also go down over time. Our bill will prohibit unfair payment terms and also bring in a speedy and binding adjudication mechanism to resolve payment disputes during works. Now, when a claiming party is unpaid, they can slow down or suspend works. With this bill, we want to address the delays in payments. We want to reduce scenarios where subcontractors are being owed their money. Now, we don't want wages to have wages in arrears, but this is not there to address the dispute between workers and their employers. That would be covered by the employment ordinance. And now come to the highlights or key points. First, we will prohibit unfair payment terms such as pay when paid clauses. This kind of clause means in a subcontracting contract, even when a claiming party has completed the works or delivered the services, that subcontractor has to wait for the upper tier party to get paid before these subcontractors get their money. Another key area of this bill is to set up an adjudication mechanism. When a payment dispute arises, the claiming party has a discretion to initiate the adjudication. This mechanism serves as a platform for contracting parties to resolve payment disputes through an independent adjudicator. The government or this legislation will not make a determination on the payment. That will be up to an experienced independent adjudicator with industry experience. The adjudication will be based on document submissions from both parties. There won't be complicated legal procedures. Adjudication will be a faster, cheaper process that also comes with a binding effect. Now, from the claiming party initiating the adjudication all the way to making of the determination, this will be 3 months. Now, this process normally takes 6 months or even years in complicated cases. The adjudication proposed will mark a major improvement. This bill will also contain safeguards against abuse. Say, one party starts adjudication on a whim. In that case, the adjudicator can make a determination for that party to pay a larger share of the costs and fees. Now, the legislative proposal. First, improvement of contract payment terms. We will prohibit unfair payment terms being pay when paid clauses. Now, when the contract is silent on these terms, the claiming party is entitled to make monthly payment claims. Contractual parties are also free to agree the payment arrangement. Once a claiming party makes a payment claim under the contractual terms, the paying party has to make a payment response within 30 days. And after receiving the payment claim, settle that claim within 60 days. With this diagram, you can see the 30-day deadline for the payment response and the 60-day deadline for settling the payment. The clock starts when the claiming party serves the payment claim. The bill will introduce an adjudication mechanism. When 3 scenarios arise, the claiming party can request an adjudication. 1. The paying party fails to serve a payment response within 30 days. Or 2. There is an omitted amount but the paying party pays less than the amount emitted, or 3, the paying party fails to pay the emitted amount in full. Once these scenarios arise and a payment dispute arises, the claiming party can choose whether to initiate adjudication.
When dispute arises, the claiming party can make a submission to the paying party as well as the adjudicating party to talk about the disputed amount as well as the content of dispute. We suggest that the adjudicator nominating body, that is A and B, shall be appointed by the professional bodies or some professional adjudicating organizations. The adjudicator needs to make a determination within 55 working days from the date of appointment, including the payment due for the paying party as well as the deadline of payment. If it involves extension of time, they will also adjudicate about the dates of work that are being extended. The parties jointly will be liable to pay the adjudicating cost, while the proportion is determined by the adjudicator. For the more complicated cases, if both parties agreed, then the adjudicating period of 55 working days can be extended. If parties are dissatisfied with the determination, they have the right to defer it to court for litigation or arbitration. Before the arbitration or the litigation results, the determination of the adjudicators will be effective. If the paying party fail to make full amount of payment determined by the adjudicator before the expiry date, the claiming party may apply to the court for enforcement of the adjudication decision after the expiry of payment deadline, and the court would send out an approval within 7 days. If the paying party fail to pay as pledged, the claiming party will have to pay from their own pocket and continue with the work. In order to facilitate payment, the third clause in the bill is to allow the claiming party to suspend or slow down work. If the stipulated circumstances exist, including the paying party who fail to pay the pledged or the admitted amount to the claiming party or the adjudicated amount to the claiming party, then the claiming party is entitled to suspend or slow down work. We want to emphasize that the previous two circumstances, including situations when they should pay and they fail to pay, and it does not involve a situations when there is a dispute about the amount that's to be paid. The claiming party cannot suspend or slow down work. Before exercising such right, the claiming party needs to notify the paying party and owner at least 5 working days before such action, so that they can put pressure on the paying party on the obligations. If necessary, the owner can also intervene, which help facilitate the resolving of dispute. When the claiming party receives the amount, they have to resume work within 5 working days. When they exercise such right, it will not be regarded as in breach of contract. They are entitled to compensation for extension of time and any loss and expenses incurred due to suspension or slowing down of work. The scope of application will cover all contracts for carrying out construction works, as well as a supply of services. And it also covers both a verbal and written contract. The main contract amount is not less than the threshold values. Threshold values for main work contracts is 5 million Hong Kong dollars. If the main work covers consultations or materials or goods, then the threshold will be set at Hong Kong dollars 0.5 million. The scope covers both the public sector as well as the statutory and also some enterprises that are stipulated in the enterprises. And it also covers private construction contracts, including construction contracts for new works, like the building of a brand new building. As for construction contracts for existing buildings or facilities, considering that the general public may not be familiar with the bill, it will be difficult for them to comply. To prevent causing nuisance to the general public, we suggest that there will be certain exemptions, including construction contracts for occupied residential buildings like interior renovations, building maintenance, etc. Another exception applies to construction contracts for non-residential buildings not requiring BA's approval, including maintenance and repair of building services, installation, shop renovation, and minor works. Under specified situation, like if the owner changed the plans, the contractor and the subcontractor is entitled to extend the time and the loss of extra cost. Payment dispute involving EOT, that is extension time, it often happens that both parties will have dispute over the dates of EOT. And the calculation of such disputes is rather complicated. And because this mechanism is brand new in the sector, taking note of the recommendation of the task force, we suggest we put it forth in two phases. First of all, we would implement it in the public sector so that the number of adjudicators will increase. And as we progress from the case of adjudication, we can accumulate experience and to showcase the qualifications of adjudications. When the mechanism is more mature, we will promote it to phase 2 to cover the private sector. As for the implementation timetable, the Secretary for Development Bureau will have the power to register A and B, and it will be immediately effective after the passage of bills. We will invite the nominating bodies to apply, and there will be recruitment as well as training. And we will also evaluate the adjudicators. We will also put together a register of adjudicators. At the same time, the sector also has to review the terms of the contract at the moment in order to comply with the new requirements under the bill. 8 months after Gazetted, the preparations of the adjudicators and the sector are expected to be completed. Major terms of the bills will start to have effect on contracts signed at that time. The government will collaborate with the review of this bill so that it can be implemented as soon as possible. Thank you. 7 members have already indicated their intention to speak. Mr. Lam Chen-Xing, Vice President Chen Xiu-Hong, Lau Kwok-Fen, Tony Che, Andrew Lam, Kwok Wai-Kang, as well as Adrian Ho. 4 minutes, question and answer. And I will be more flexible in time control. Perhaps the administration needs to clarify in details regarding certain questions. I hope that you can be precise. We have also Ms. Doreen Kong. She is not a member of this committee. Mr. Lam Chen-Xing. Thank you, Chair. I support this bill. From the press or from the news coverage, we often see construction workers protesting about area wages. And people would say that it is the union who is causing trouble, but it is not true because the problem is not caused by them, but the employers. The subcontractors failed to receive payment, so they have prepared banners and asked the construction workers to protest, and they also called journalists to cover a story. Hopefully, after the passage of bill, the lower tier contractors will be able to get paid so that the construction workers can receive their wages. I truly hope that this problem can be resolved. As the administration introduced the bill to us, I noticed that there is a specific scope. For works that do not need to submit a design draft, it is not being covered. However, there are works like renovation of a restaurant or the renovation and maintenance of some shopping malls are likely to be out of scope. However, the amount of such works can be quite substantial, including tens of millions, even hundreds of millions. If they are out of scope, then those subcontractors and workers will not have the protection that they required. Default in payment also occurred in that kind of contract. I understand that if you include every kind of work, it might cause nuisance to the general public. Is it possible for you to set out an amount, including, for example, like 10 million or 20 million? If they meet that threshold, it shall also fall into the scope because the risk would be pretty high. If they cannot resolve the dispute of payment in the upper tier, then all the subcontractors and workers in the lower tier will be impacted. Can you try to cover more types of work so that more people will be protected? Second, I would like to ask about the suspension of work. I believe it is a nice arrangement. In the past, workers need to continue with work even when they are not paid because they might be sued for violation of contract. What you are proposing now is a good arrangement. But the procedures is pretty long. You need to submit a notice of payment. There needs to be a response to payment and also rounds of discussion as well as the process of adjudication. And it might take 2 months. And then the adjudicator needs to set out a deadline of payment. If the paying party fails to pay, then the claiming party is entitled to suspend work or slow down work. It might take over 6 months. If they still fail to retrieve payment, the loss will be substantial. Is it possible for you to allow the subcontractors who fail to receive payment to suspend work or to slow down work? For instance, you can allow them to slow down work before the adjudication or during the adjudication. The adjudicator is entitled to allow the claiming party suspend work so that the claiming party can decide for the next step after the adjudication. I think your question is pretty clear. The administration can start to respond. Or otherwise, you would have asked a question of 4 minutes. Well, for the questions about our existing threshold, I would defer it to the Deputy Secretary. The second question is about suspension of work. The proposal of this bill is to help resolve payment dispute in construction works. It is not our intention for people to rely on the statutory process and in turn causing the slowing down of works or an increase of litigations. I would like to emphasize one point. You can't just suspend work just because you want to ask for an adjudication. If that is the case, then the development of Hong Kong as well as the whole construction industry will be greatly impacted. Simply by submitting a request of adjudication do not make you entitled for a suspension of work. But once you file it, the decision of adjudication will be delivered in 60 days. If the amount is being decided and the paying party still fail to pay, then the claiming party will be entitled to suspend. There will be a notice period of 5 days. Even before entering into the adjudication, the claiming party would have made a request. If the paying party made a pledge to pay at a certain date and they still fail to pay, this is another circumstances when the claiming party can suspend the work. I hope that the situations can be regulated. As the bill has stipulated, first, you fail to pay with a decided amount. Second, you have pledged to pay, yet they failed to do so. It was before adjudication. That was the second situation when the claiming party can suspend the work. You only need to file a 5 days notice. It is a rather simple procedure. And because this is that simple, it needs to be regulated.
Now, the question about the scope of the bill. Thank you, Chairman. At the task force, we had a thorough discussion about the scope of the bill. Projects come in different sizes. They are of different kinds. We try to include as many projects as we can, but we have to strike a balance. For smaller projects, asking those contractors to meet all those requirements may not be a proportionate approach. That's why we set a threshold, $5 million. Some projects involve the general public or SMEs, so we include exemptions too. For residential blocks, the average person may not be familiar with the requirements of the bill. For malls with large-scale renovations, when the value is high, submission of building plans tends to be required and there is no exemption. Now, say you have a project over $100 million without the requirement of submitting building plans, that may be a straightforward project. Say it's fixing things up or polishing, finishing the external walls or replacing panels. In those cases, no building plan has to be submitted. That work is straightforward. In that case, there's less of a need for subcontracting. In those cases, contractors work with long-term partners. In those cases, we see fewer payment disputes. So we draw the line clearly. We want people to know that projects that do not require submitting building plans are exempted. So that's the idea of the plan. So when you have to submit a building plan, no exemption, and they fall under this bill. Now, there's a line that says for occupied residential buildings, such as interior renovations, building maintenance, but there was no reference to the need to submit a building plan. So are you saying that whenever a project does not require a building plan, that project is exempted? Those projects can come with large contract values. The member mentioned renovations for restaurants and malls. Since in those cases you have to submit a building plan, they get no exemption. But for residential blocks, maintenance projects involve owners and owners' corporations. Those projects are exempted. Those projects are excluded regardless of whether a building plan is involved. But the drafting here says occupied residential buildings such as interior renovations, maintenance. But what about large-scale building maintenance? Is that excluded? I think the member was wondering whether that's the case. Can you explain that? So building maintenance projects are not included. Operation Building Bright, even a $100 million project, even that is not included. We've talked to the construction industry. The OCs enter into a contract with the contractor. Individual owners have to make many decisions. When disputes arise, and if we require an adjudication, the OCs have to be involved. The bill here stresses a fast resolution mechanism. We want the dispute resolved within 55 days. An OC may not be able to handle that. I get your point. So you're saying when OCs are involved and there's building maintenance, this mechanism is not suitable. As I said, I would be flexible with time management because it takes time to clarify these points. So time management with BC meetings is like this. Sometimes we cannot avoid long answers, but please let us be succinct. Mr. Chen Xiuhong, Deputy Chairperson. Chairman, I agree with you. This is our first meeting. We're discussing policy matters. The industry has been waiting for this bill for a long time. No bill will be perfect and solves every problem there is. To come up with an even better bill, we may have to wait for many years, and that's impracticable. So, having something is better than nothing. So let's first have this framework in place. Let's build an industry-wide consensus. You don't have to turn to litigation all the time. Wages in arrears should not be the norm. We should not let workers just pay without getting paid. And then there are players that cannot endure the cash flow pressure and they fold. We don't want that. For this bill, once we have a framework, people have something to follow. At some point, a contractor can slow down or suspend work, and then we have adjudication. Let's give this framework some time. Now, I want to first ask about something, about wages in arrears. It's a long-standing problem in the construction sector. The Secretary and her team are determined to address this problem at root, a problem confronting all stakeholders in the sector. The Bureau engaged a consultant to conduct a survey. One reason behind the payment issues is that the claiming party and the paying party disagree over the amount, and often more than one layer is involved. When a lower tier subcontractor fails to pay workers, the workers go to the upper tier contractor. So the parties thought they would just put up with the problem, but then now you have this bill, people will try to go to the upper tier parties to recover the money. Now there's an issue in the sector. When you go to upper tier parties, those upper tier parties refuse to pay the wages owed by the lower tier parties, and then you get senseless disputes. This bill cannot fix those problems. So what's the position of the government on this? Now, the BFAC was involved. There was a business impact assessment. That assessment sets out issues that can be resolved. That assessment also sets out unintended consequences. Now, the quantity surveyor may designate projects, the contractors are paid, but then there are delays in the payment. The main contractor underestimated the project cost, and then there's the risk of adjudication. So apart from this particular unintended consequence, those unintended consequences may be insidious. So are there studies pointing to unintended consequences apart from the example I cited? Are there other unintended consequences that you think you can fix in the first stage? Thank you. Secretary, the two questions turn on the details. My colleague, the permanent secretary, can take those questions. Now, about wages owed by lower tier parties and also wages in arrears. This bill addresses contractual disputes between two parties. This is about resolving disputes between business parties. Once we get that part fixed, the subcontractor gets paid. Workers are more likely to be paid as well. This bill does not deal with wages in arrears for workers or wages in arrears across different subcontracting layers. Those issues are solved under the protection of wages upon insolvency fund. We want the contractors and their subcontractors to address their disputes earlier on. There are layers. The owners don't pay the contractor. The main contractor has to endure with it, and then the subcontractors don't get paid by the main contractors. Once we have this bill, the lower tier parties can file the payment claim. The upper tier parties have to address the payment claims. So the pressure goes back up to the owner. The position now is still healthy. At the lower tier parties, those players are in a more vulnerable position. When each layer pays on time, the entire industry chain, the entire ecosystem will see a healthy picture. The risks are shifted back onto the upper tier parties, but overall, this looks healthy. Chairman, I have a question about the unintended consequences discussed at the Business Facilitation Advisory Committee. Are there other unintended consequences that may come up? From our discussions with the industry, we haven't thought of any. As the member suggested, let's let this bill go, and we give it some time and see what comes up. Secretary. Now, with the adjudication mechanism, the adjudicator makes a determination on the amount. Some professionals worry. Professionals first made the decision. That decision became the subject of a determination down the road, and these professionals are accused of making a mistake. This kind of pressure is inevitable. We bring in an adjudication mechanism. That process may find out that some earlier decisions were not exactly right. This kind of pressure will be there. The industry just has to face up to this. With more adjudication cases, the industry can build up experience. In that case, the professionals will be better aware of the factors to consider when it comes to the materials, the surveying. So once we take the first step, we can further improve the system down the road. Mr. Edward Lau. I support this bill and its early passage. We have received requests for help, wages in arrears. Some contractors have to dip into their own funds to keep the work going. This is bad for the entire construction industry. When those issues come out, morale will be low, workers will be unmotivated. This bill will protect workers and lower-tier subcontractors. This will be good for the construction sector's development. We had this panel discussion last year. The bill was supposed to take effect a year after Gazetted. But then we said it would make no sense to wait for so long. Now the bill will take effect 8 months instead of 1 year after Gazetted. We know it will take time to create this mechanism. So we thank the government for taking on board our suggestions. I do have some questions for the government. For private project, all public contracts will be covered, but then for private projects, not all projects are covered. The government said it wants to wait for the system to be more well established before the adjudication can cover all private contracts. So have resolved all the issues so that the private sector contracts can also be covered. Now, on the adjudication, when both parties submit to adjudication, do the parties know upfront what the adjudication costs will be? Of course, they wouldn't know how much time the adjudication would last, but will the parties have an idea upfront about how much that adjudication will cost? Now, there may be several layers of subcontractors. They're going after smaller amounts. If the adjudication is costly, that may put off the lower tier subcontractors. The government said to guard against abuse, there will be a portioning of the adjudication fees. When the adjudicator thinks one side is abusing the system, that side will be required to pay a larger share. Now, but what if you have a reasonable request from the claiming party? The upper tier party deliberately drags things out. So, shouldn't we ask the defaulting party to pay the full adjudication costs? The adjudicator can only decide on the apportioning of adjudication costs. So I'm just wondering, can we get one side to bear the full cost in some cases? The adjudication costs will have a bearing on whether the claiming party wants to go for adjudication. This will be a new system. The parties have little idea how much the adjudication would cost. And then the time frame of the adjudication. You start the adjudication, it will take 60 days or so. And then the adjudication is 55 days, altogether 4 months. As other members said, the lower tier subcontractors may not have enough cash flow to get through that time. Can we shorten the time frame?
Yes, Secretary. There are 3 questions in total. First questions ask if this bill applies to works in the private sector and if there is any limitations. This is something that I would like to clarify. I am aware that there are some media coverage that says this bill does not apply to works in private sector. It is not true. As you can see in the PowerPoint, there are only some exemptions. For existing buildings in the private sector, if we are talking about renovations or renovations of commercial buildings, there will be exemptions. There is a second type. It is not an exemption if the dispute involved concerns the extension of time. Then temporarily it will not be applicable. Our intention is clear. It will fall into scope sooner or later. When the system is more established, we will stipulate the dispute that involves extension of time under our jurisdiction. On the other hand, there are disputes that does not involve extension of time. Let's say the subcontractor makes a claim after the completion of work. There will be a review of the works completed to see if it is an appropriate time to pay. Have you really completed your work? Is your work of good quality? Are you not getting paid because the work is substandard? Is there an additional requirement? Sometimes the contracting parties might add terms to the contract. If you add terms without concluding the amount of payment, there will be disputes. After this bill comes into effect, all these aspects will fall under the scope of adjudication. That is what I meant by dispute involving extension of time. And we are talking about the private sector. If there is a dispute involving extension of time in the public sector works, it will also be adjudicated. The second question is about the adjudicators as well as the A and B. What will be the charges of these parties? When this bill comes into effect, we will set out a price list to serve as a reference for the sector. Well, for the nominating party, they will also charge for the nominations, and it might be determined according to the scale of the contract. We will offer the sector some price list as a reference. The adjudicator will charge on an hourly basis. Hopefully, we will provide a price list. If necessary, the bill will allow the Secretary for Development Bureau to set the ceiling of charge. We try not to over-intervene the operation of the adjudication, but we wish to keep it transparent, and we want to offer this sector with references. Members also asked about the principle of the splitting of charges. If there are charges after adjudications, it will be up to the adjudicator to determine the proportion of the charges. During the introduction, it said if we discover the abuse of the system, we trust that the adjudicator would require that particular party to take up a higher proportion of share. It will be determined by the adjudicator. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, Chair. As the Secretary mentioned, it has been discussed by the sector for years. I am representing 4 professional bodies, and they have all shared their views. Some of their views are being reflected in the drafting of this bill. As mentioned by the administration, stakeholders of the construction industry largely support this bill. If it is passed, then the norm of default in payment in construction industry will be alleviated. Therefore, I support it in principle. There are a few points that I would like to learn more. As other members have asked, or the Deputy Secretary has already responded to it, in the construction sector, there will be layers of subcontracting. For those in the lowest layer, sometimes they might file a claim. And it is often caused by the failure in payment on the side of the upper tier contractors. While the lowest tier subcontractor might file a claim, while the upper tier subcontractor also file a claim. Can we combine the adjudication, if that is the case? And second, about the abuse of the mechanism. And you have put in place the appropriating of charges to prevent abuse. Do you have any other methods to prevent abuse? My third question. The layers of subcontracting. If one of the subcontractors file for bankruptcy, let's say the main contractor bankrupt, then all the subcontractors will fail to receive payments. Or if one of the subcontractors is bankrupt, then the lower tier subcontractors will fail to receive payment as well. Have you put into any thoughts in this situation in order to prevent this from happening? If it is the subcontractor or the subcontractor that goes into bankruptcy, then the lower tier subcontractor will not be able to receive payments. Can you offer them any assistance? Well, because the lowest tier subcontractor are more vulnerable to this risk. You want to offer them more protection so that the construction workers will be able to receive their wages. Thank you, Chair. Secretary, there are 3 questions. The first question concerns the combining of adjudication when different tiers of subcontractors are filing claims. We did not prohibit that, but it will be more complicated. We are not sure if it can be completed within the time frame that we stipulated. It can be more challenging. The other 2 questions, I would like to defer it to the Deputy Secretary. Thank you. About the prevention of abuse, of course, we have the appropriating of adjudicating charges. The adjudicator will request the party that is being unreasonable to pay more. There are also other clauses in the bills. Normally, there will be some arrangements about the claim handling procedures. The manager of the contract, let's say the architect or the engineer, needs to take care of the claim. We require them to complete this step before they can file a claim. Second, you cannot resubmit your claim if it is already being adjudicated. The subcontractor cannot resubmit a claim that is already being adjudicated. Thirdly, one particular party may submit new evidence, and it might caught the other party off guard. If we see such unreasonable submission of evidence, or if the subcontractor fails to respond in a reasonable time frame, then the adjudicator will disregard such evidence. To prevent subcontractors from abusing the mechanism, before the completion of adjudication, then the claiming party is not entitled to suspend or slow down work. Thank you, Chair. Next, Mr. Andrew Lam. There are some unanswered questions. Well, actually, it has happened before about the issues of bankruptcy. In the bill, we talks about both parties in the contract. If the main contractor bankrupt, then it will affect the lower tier subcontractor. But the dispute between the lower tier parties, it is not within the scope of the bills, but there are existing ordinance which takes care of that situation. Will you consider this? Because you want to offer help to the most grassroots workers. I know it is a situation that happens frequently, but would you consider looking into this? It depends from case to case. There are situations when there are subcontractors will have troubles in cash flows, but then the upper tier contractors may share the responsibility and pay the wages. But we cannot handle it with one single formula. There are ordinances which takes care of the situation of bankruptcy, right? Well, there are some special cases. Sometimes the contractors are still in the process of filing for bankruptcy, but still the construction workers need to get paid. As I said, it will be very difficult to handle it with just one mechanism because the situation varies. If I understand it correctly, be it the construction industry or any other industries, if there is any other companies that enters into the procedures of liquidation, then the company ordinance will take over. There are certain clauses which determines which party can do what. As we formulate this bill, our clauses do not want to violate the provision listed out in the company ordinance. When a company is already bankrupt, then there are clauses that determines what needs to be done. The questions that we are talking about now is when a company is still in the process. Well, because when it is being bankrupt, then the doubters will have a priority of getting payments. So how can we continue the work when one particular party is in the process of filing for bankruptcy? I think this is something that we cannot discuss in details.
Mr. Andrew Lam, it's better to have this bill than not to have it. Now, it's about money. Let's look at the delayed payments in the construction sector. I see 5 reasons. 1, Party A shifts the pressure on its own cash flow to Party B. It's better to keep the money in my pocket than to pay someone. This can be fixed by this bill, and it's a good thing. But the other 4 reasons, I'm not skeptical. It's just that I wonder if this bill can truly address those 4 reasons. I would like a response now. The first point, as Mr. Tony Te has pointed out, Party A runs into cash flow issues due to maybe mismanagement, regardless of whether there is bankruptcy. We have to think about whether this bill creates conditions for cash flow issues to come up at any level. Companies went into bankruptcy before this bill. I'm not going to say this bill causes companies to go bankrupt, but I wonder, will more companies come under pressure because of this bill? And that's because of a change. In the past, the upper tier party did not pay the subcontractors. The lower parties could take out loans. But now the business environment is bad. So given the current set of circumstances, we will see a domino effect. I get it that the bill may not be a silver bullet, but can the government look into whether there will be this kind of knock-on effect? Now, reason 3, unclear payment terms leading to payment issues. Just as Mr. Chen Xihong mentioned, the 2-part wages issue. I heard the reply from the permanent secretary. I'm not disagreeing. We had this discussion during the consultations. There are already safeguards for workers' pay. I've skimmed through this bill once or twice. Oral contracts, in addition to written contracts, are covered. So I think there is some attention to the issue of the 2-part wages. One reason behind delayed payment is unclear contractual terms. When you go to the lower tier contracts, those subcontractors do a very simple task and there is no contract. Reason 4, it's about the assessment of the materials or work done. The consultant decides that the payment should not be made. Say, there are other reasons in the sector. The sector is short-staffed. There are cultural issues. The human factor cannot be fully addressed by the law. And finally, disputes over the quality of work or workmanship. This also leads to payment delays. So, for these 4 issues, will this bill help address the issue of payment delays in those 4 ways, Secretary? The member brought up issues common in the industry: unclear contractual terms, parties simply refusing to pay, shifting the pressure onto the other party, or issues with the measurement or assessment of work done. So each side delays each side drags things out for various reasons, sorting things out and whatnot. That's why we need a system. This framework will create pressure. The issues are there, so we have this framework to put pressure on the parties. If you want to avoid an adjudication, you have to give a response on time. That means you have to get on with the work. When someone files a claim and you pay on time, you have to prepare beforehand in terms of your cash flow. Of course, this framework will create pressure. That's why it took us such a long time to talk to the sector. Even now, we have a consensus. There is some time before the new legislation takes effect after the bill is passed. The preparations involve the signing of new contract, cash flow, quality control, streamlining the workflow. These are required for the sector. All that takes time. There will be some pressure that will be created by the new framework, but we believe this kind of pressure is benign in nature. It's a kind of positive pressure to get the parties to do things right, get the money ready beforehand. It's a question of fairness. You cannot refuse to pay just because you lack the cash. So it's about striking a balance here. This is not a perfect answer. There will be pressure, but we have to face up to the pressure. That will ensure the long-term healthy development of the construction sector. On quality of work and staffing ratio, you will never find a point when all sides are happy and then the money is paid. When there is a delay in payments, adjudication comes in. The adjudication will not be perfect, but this is not to say the one party can choose not to pay. At least we fix the cash flow issue in the moment. So that's where the adjudication comes in. On workmanship and measurement work, those are separate issues. Those issues will remain. So that's what I take to be the position, Permanent Secretary. Chairman, you're right. For obvious quality issues, we have the adjudicators who are professionals, experienced people. They can make an independent adjudication or determination. In the industry, you see cases where the upper tier parties have unrealistic or unreasonable assessments of the quality, and the lower tier parties disagree. It's good to have a professional to take a look at the situation. As the Secretary said, the main contractor, once paid, should pay their subcontractors. This is also a way to ensure the contract between the owner and the main contractor is regulated so that each party gets paid. The member also mentioned oral contract. When you go to the lower tier contract, those contracts are very simple. It's just a slip of paper or even oral contract or just WhatsApp messages. When disputes arise, the adjudicator looks at the correspondence. Those may not be formal contracts, but the records will help show the adjudicator what the agreement is about. Now, is the 30-day window for serving a payment response too much of a rush? Normal contracts come with monthly payment claims. There's supposed to be a response within 30 days. Within government contracts, the requirement is a payment response within 28 days. Within 28 days, you can get all those measurement work done. Mr. Kwok Wai-Keung. For the average worker, when their wages are not paid, Section 43C of the Employment Ordinance says the workers can ask the main contractor to pay first. Still, you see workers' protests outside construction sites. Even foremen or main contractors come to us for help. They struggle too. They work for their pay. Main contractors will have to file a civil suit to recover the outstanding pay because they operate on limited budget too, so that's not fair on them too. This bill will help. It's better than nothing. We make a start and then we gradually improve the bill. This bill is far from perfect. On the timelines, it's too long. A payment response within 30 days. In the worst case scenario, adjudication is involved. It can take up to 6 months. Why can we have a shorter time frame instead? The smaller a subcontractor, the weaker the cash flow. The longer things drag on, the harder things are for those subcontractors. I had this question in mind. Say, what if you have an upper-tier party that simply flees? When the subcontractor flees, the contracts at the lower tiers remain in place. Say you have a lower-tier subcontractor that vanishes. Can the parties further down pursue the matter with the other upper-tier parties? Now, I want to ask about suspension. The matter has dragged on for 6 months. The work remains incomplete. Is there a deadline for the overall project? Say the work was supposed to wrap up in a month. There should be no suspension because all the issues should have been taken care of. The work is done and then you take 6 months to resolve payment disputes. So we are looking at very long projects, longer than 6 months, and only then you will see suspension of work. Well, maybe the government can tell me more about this in a moment. So say you trigger the suspension mechanism. The penalty is not serious for the paying party. They simply pay what's outstanding. When extra time is needed, there is extension of time claims, there is compensation. I have no idea how large the amount is. But when the work is suspended, workers live paycheck to paycheck. They don't get paid during suspension. Should the workers also get paid during the suspension? The workers may have to move on to other work, or they would have moved on to other work without the suspension. Now the suspension affects the future work of the workers. So the foremen and the workers lose the potential income from future projects. So will we be asking the upper tier parties to pay more? When the work is suspended, will there be more safeguards for the workers? The government said the suspension is a great option, but I don't see how we can see workers safeguarded in that case. Secretary.
Regarding the protection towards the workers during suspension, I would like to ask my colleague to help respond then. Let me respond to your first question. Under this bill, There are some suggested time frame for responding. After filing a claim, you have to respond in 1 month's time. After 2 months of filing of complaint, you have of the claim, you have to make payments. Even before the introduction of adjudication, this is a understood reasonable time frame of filing a claim and making payments. The only additional period of time is when you enter into the period of adjudication, because it is a new arrangement. If you file for adjudication, then within 7 days, there will be an adjudicator. Within 55 days, the adjudicator shall receive all the written submissions from both parties and make a decision. I believe it is already a very short period of time. It includes 60-odd days. Then there will be a decided amount, and they need to pay within a month's time. So the total is 90 days. Normally the default in payment would take up to 9 months or even 2 to 3 years. Comparatively speaking, this is already a rather short period of time. On the normal days, there are claims towards the claim of payments, and now we are proposing that you need to make payments in 2 months' time. I think this arrangement gives a peace of mind to the sector, and it is not deviating too much from what is customary in the sector. Second question is about penalty. The adjudication is a mechanism in place for the claiming party to make use of it in order to resolve the dispute. To resolve the dispute is to have payments. When you pay, it is resolved. So it does not induce any criminal offenses. It is not the government who is here to judge and to penalize, because it will deter many other parties. Just now, the member said they failed to pay even with a decided amount by the adjudicator. Then the contracting party is entitled to suspend works. Then what is the protection for the construction workers under these circumstances? I would like to defer this question to the Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Chair. If the subcontractor suffers in cash flow because the upper tier contractor failed to make payments, then it is likely that the lower tier subcontractor will not be able to commence work, and it also hamper the employment of construction workers. In this bill, the lower tier subcontractor is entitled to take some actions if the upper tier contractors fail to pay. They can suspend work with a 5 days notice. They need to notify both the upper tier subcontractor and the owner. There is a vested interest on the part of owner, so they might intervene in order to resolve the dispute. Then there will not be any delays in the works, as well as the assurance of the employment of the workers. If it is not in place, then the subcontractor needs to continue the work. Then it is posing even greater pressure on the subcontractor, because they need to continue the work on one hand, and they need to pay to cover the cost of the continuation of works. So it is even more undesirable to the subcontractors. It is also impacting the livelihood of construction workers. I do not believe that suspension of work is a trump card, but it is at least better than requiring the subcontractor to continue to pay and work without getting paid themselves. Mr. Adrian Ho. First off, I very much support the objective of this bill, and I also believe that it will help resolve some problems in cash flows in the sector. upcoming, we can see a large amount of construction works coming up. We believe that this bill will be of great help. I would like to learn more about the qualifications of the adjudicator under this mechanism. In principle, I agree that the adjudicator needs to be experienced in taking care of the managing or resolving the dispute of contracts. I just worried if there will be any conflict of interest. Can you clarify about the vetting process of the adjudicators? Second, any construction project involves numerous contracts. Sometimes it involves the owner and the main contractor and then different tiers of subcontractors. The contracts are not all signed at the same time. The contracts of the upper tier parties and the lower tier parties are likely to be signed when this bill started to come into effect. If there is a dispute between the lower tiers subcontractors and it is signed during the bill is coming into effect, but if this dispute is caused by the failure of payment in the upper tier parties while their contracts are signed before this bill comes into effect, would it hampered the entitlement or the rights of the lower tier subcontractors? There are two questions. The first one involves the qualifications of the adjudicator as well as the issue of conflict of interest. At the moment, we hope that the adjudicators will be coming from four major groups, including architects, engineers, surveyors, as well as professional legal officers. We believe that these four groups of people are familiar with this kind of payment disputes. They are the most qualified persons to judge on these cases because they are experienced. But we will also see if they are experienced in dealing with contracts as well as dispute resolutions. They also need related training. Allow me to use the word training because they are already professional. After this bill comes into effect, we will offer some training courses for them. They need to fulfill all these requirements before becoming an adjudicator. Members concerned that these kind of people are always involved in these kind of contracts, be it the legal officers or the surveyors. So there will be issues of conflict of interest. In a particular case, if he is the adjudicator and if he or she is involved in the supply chain, there will be a conflict of interest. It is likely that he cannot become the adjudicator of that particular case. We have invited professional bodies to put together some guidelines in order to resolve issues of conflict of interest, and such work has already commenced. As for the code of practice or the qualifications of the adjudicators, we will put in place some documentations. There will be some administrative guidelines. We are in discussion with the professional bodies. They are already preparing such documents. Can you remind me of the second question? Effective dates. Within 8 months, there will be the Gazette of this bill when it is approved, and after 8 months of the Gazette, this bill will come into effect. All the main contracts signed after the effective date will be governed by this bill. It is determined by the signing of main contract. Normally speaking, the main contracts will come into effect first, and then we will have the contracts of the other tiers of subcontractors. Let's say the situation that you explained existed. That is, there are contracts of some lower tiers subcontractors that are signed before the effective date, we will still determine according to the signing of the main contract. My question is just the opposite. The main contract is signed before the effective date, while the contracts of the subcontractors will be signed after the effective date. Does it mean that the subcontractors cannot file any claims under this bill? Yes. I believe that when the intention of this bill is being highlighted, then people will have to sign in accordance to the approval of this bill so that they can all be secured. Mr. Rincon, thank you, Chair. Of course, I support this bill. In my experience, I witnessed that the subcontractors suffer. Sometimes they fail to receive payments even after years of completion of work. I trust that the administration has put a lot of effort into this bill. I compare similar bills in other jurisdictions. The drafting of this bill has considered many issues faced by the Hong Kong sector. We are not just copying from other jurisdictions. I'm glad to see that. I have a number of questions. The Secretary has mentioned that we would allow adjudicating bodies to put together their own guidelines. I'm a little worried. There are several professional bodies. Do they share one common guidelines, or can each of them put together their own guidelines? Because the existing bill allow them to have their own guidelines. It might cause confusions. The Secretary also mentioned about the adjudicating charges. He said that there might be a price or a price ceiling. I worry about the competition ordinance. Among the professional bodies, we have some lottery assigned by the Chinese party or the legal offices, because we have discussed with the Competition Commission and we have sought advice from them. I want to see if you have discussed it with the Competition Commission. Another question is on the policy level. The result of the adjudication is confidential. Secretary has put it very well. He said that after a period of time, we hope that we can accumulate some experiences. In Australia, they have put together this bill in 2014, and it has been 10 years. Recently, they have reviewed the bill and allowed the disclosure of the result of adjudications. However, the critical information, including the names of parties and names of the contract parties, can be deducted. So that will be some deterring effect. Second, everybody can learn more from the past. Would the Secretary consider that? The first question concerns the guidelines of different professional bodies. This is not the case. What we are doing now is to invite professional bodies to draft guidelines for different aspects. After the drafting, the professional bodies have to come together and publish one set of guidelines. For example, the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center have helped us to put together the principle, code of practice, etc. As for the guidelines regarding conflict of interest, we have now commissioned RICS to help us draft that code of practice. It is only a drafting process. It is up to the government to approve it before the release of the guidelines. Speaking of the charges, what we want to do is to put together a reference of price list. We will not regulate a certain charges, although the bill has allowed the Secretary for Development Bureau to set a price ceiling if necessary. But we will not exercise this power casually. We did intend to release a price list reference, and we are also in communication with the Competition Commission. It is all right for us to release a price list reference. We have noted the opinion of the member.
With adjudications, with more experience, industry players will learn from the experience, but since we will be keeping the adjudication results secret or determinations secret, we don't want to disclose the details, even with the names redacted. There are indeed many stakeholders, but the sector is not a huge one. You can guess which companies those are. That's why there are worries. People may think a certain professional has messed up in a certain case. We don't want that kind of impression. Now on adjudications, whether we can choose some cases and come up with case studies and analyses, we can offer a consolidated version of the analyses instead of just giving the details of individual cases. Mr. Louis Long, 3 questions from me. I will be brief to allow time for the government to reply. Construction industry security payment as an issue has been in discussion for more than 10 years. In principle, I support this bill. I'm a member of this bill's committee. My duty is to look at the drafting of the bill. I have to make sure once the bill is implemented, no issues come up. Now I turn to my questions. The government said there is broad industry support for this bill. I believe that's the case too. Still, some people are worried. Can the government tell us about those concerns? Have we addressed those concerns in this bill? This bill stresses adjudicators. Will we have enough adjudicators to meet future demands? And now my last question. This bill will take effect in 2 stages. For the private sector, the adjudication of extension of time claims or EOT claims will not apply for the private sector. I believe this is in response to worries from the sector. And then in phase 2, the Secretary for Development will maybe make a piece of subsidiary legislation to implement that mechanism for the private sector. In making that decision, what criteria will the Secretary consider in launching the 2nd stage? Those are my 3 questions. Over to the Secretary. Chairman, I will take the 3rd question. My colleague, the Permanent Secretary, will take the first 2 questions. Now, on resolving dispute around EOT claims. Private sector contracts will not be covered by the adjudication of EOT claims for now, but it will be covered in the future at a date to be confirmed. The launch date will depend on the experience we build up for this payment dispute resolutions. Now, for public sector contracts or contracts of specified bodies, when EOT claims are involved in a payment dispute, adjudication can cover those claims too. So public body contracts, specified body contracts, adjudication will cover EOT claims. Public sector contracts and the contracts from specified bodies make up at least half the construction contract. This means we will be building experience in at least half of our construction project. The experience in payment dispute resolution will help us explain to the private sector players who worry about the use of adjudication for EOT claims. Now, my colleague, the Permanent Secretary, can take the first two questions. We've talked to industry stakeholders about this bill over the past few years. There are a few key concerns. First, EOT claims. Whether we have enough adjudicators to handle complicated claims. So we take a phased approach in what we do. Hopefully that can address the industry's concerns. Some stakeholders worry that they make a decision only to be overturned by an adjudicator in the future. Now, professional decisions are meant to be made in a sensible way. If there's something wrong, someone can point that out. The adjudicators will also be experienced professionals. Now, on whether a lower tier party can blackmail upper tier parties with adjudication, as we said, there are safeguards against abuse. So there are safeguards against unreasonable claims. On the number of adjudicators available, the legislation will take effect 8 months after the bill is gazetted. We've talked to the professional bodies. At this moment, there are more than 200 experienced adjudicators. Since it will take a while before the legislation takes effect, so there will be more effort into training and recruitment so that we have more qualified adjudicators to help us with the adjudication. Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Judy Chen. Thank you, Chairman. This bill has been under discussion for a long time. We want to create a healthy ecosystem in the industry, and this bill can help us. Now, I want to ask a question about the scope. Other members have asked questions on this. We have heard from the government too. We want to create norms with this bill. You have to have enough cash. You cannot refuse to pay the claiming parties. For projects involving private residential blocks, no building plan submission is needed. There aren't many such projects. If that's the case, why not cover those projects under this bill? For the bill to create or make a difference, having so many exemptions may make things complicated for users. So someone has to wonder whether their project is covered by the bill or not. To create a norm or consensus in the community, we should not have so many exemptions. We should include private residential blocks or projects involving no building plan submissions. Private buildings also come with complicated cases. They're composite buildings. So I invite the government to rethink this point. Now I have some questions on the technicalities. Say workers' wages are in arrears. They go to the labor tribunal. Indeed, the labor tribunal takes much more time to resolve a dispute. So when you have both an adjudication here and also a case at the labor tribunal in parallels, which one will come first? Which one prevails? And also, on the expected outcomes, I'm not sure if this will happen. You have a dispute. The upper tier party is not happy about the performance of a lower tier party. The upper tier party is not happy with the workmanship. Say a determination is made, the upper tier party refuses to pay, the lower tier party can suspend work. But then the upper tier party just leaves things be. The upper tier party simply goes to look for a different subcontractor and refuses to pay. Will that happen? Secretary, 3 questions. The first question was answered, but Ms. Judy Chan's question was whether we will include private residential blocks project. And then there was a question about labor dispute and also what happens when you have this row between the upper tier and lower tier parties. My colleagues will take the first and third questions. The member wondered about so many exemptions, and that's making things complicated. We are striking a balance. For projects involving occupied private residential blocks, say there's renovation or maintenance, under Operation Building Bright, there may be major renovation or maintenance project. The paying party is the owner's corporation or individual owners where the building has no OC. The government is encouraging building owners to perform duties about building maintenance. The Urban Renewal Authorities is also introducing a streamlined approach. And now we are bringing in the Construction Industry Security of Payment Bill. The main contractor may tell the owners that the lower tier subcontractors are initiating adjudications, and that may get the owners worried. Now, the owners are not what we're trying to target. What we've seen is that when you have a large-scale project and then each layer refuses to pay their claiming parties, we want to target those cases. We don't want to target building owners. There are other ways, Chairman. Following the Secretary's line of reasoning, say I'm an individual building owner. If I know there is this bill to protect me, that can ensure my lower tier parties will pay their own subcontractors. That can ensure my own maintenance project won't just fall by the wayside. Chairman, this is a matter of perspectives. For building maintenance or renovation, the building owner is at the top of the hierarchy. When a lower tier party files a claim and pursues the matter all the way to the top of the hierarchy, the building owners are worried. We want to target large-scale construction projects instead. Indeed, this is a matter of perspective. We don't want to make things too contentious such that we cannot get this bill over the line. Now, on labor disputes, This bill regulates oral and written contracts between contractual parties. So this is about contracts between businesses. This bill is not about what happens between a business and its employees. Any employment issue is dealt with under the employment ordinance. We keep these two kinds of disputes separate. Otherwise, more complicated problems come up, which is the last thing we want to see. The employment ordinance has safeguards and protection for workers on suspension, wages in default. The employment ordinance can work as it does now. For our bill here, it's about the different contractual parties. Getting things right on this front can reduce cases of wages in arrears. Because with this bill, workers, employers will get paid, and that means better protection for workers. But when workers are not paid, that's dealt with under the employment ordinance.
Permanent Secretary. Thank you, Chair. Members are asking about after adjudication, the upper tier contractor is supposed to pay the lower tier contractors, and if they do not do that, then there will be suspension of work, and it will give the upper tier contractors an excuse to replace the subcontractor. Well, truly, the suspension of work will hamper the progress of work. Therefore, the subcontractor is required to notify the owner before they suspend the work, so that the owner can determine whether or not he would want to lobby the parties. After adjudication, if the subcontractor or the lower tier subcontractor is supposed to receive payments, then the upper tier contractor needs to pay. Failure to do so, the lower tier contractor can go to the court. Third, there is a contract existing between the upper tier and the lower tier subcontractors. If they do not comply with the contracting terms and instead look for another party to do the work instead, then the existing contractual terms shall be able to govern that. Next, Mr. Lai Tong Kwok. I would like to follow up the questions of Ms. Judy Chen. I cannot accept your explanation. The renewal of building is something very important. It value up to hundreds of millions of dollars. So if the OC allowed a contract to the main contractor, I cannot believe that there are no lower tier subcontractors. The default in payment under such circumstances is exactly the kind of situation that we want to deal with in this bill. If the subcontractor failed to pay the subcontractor, they can already file a claim. It is actually the same as any other construction contract. There is no difference because the objective of this bill is punctual payment. I cannot see why you say this is complicated. Because all that you want to do is to simplify the claim of payment. Why would you say that it is complicated? If you are talking about individual residential units, then it may be too trivial. We should not involve the specified body. But if you are talking about the building maintenance, it is unreasonable for you to exempt that. Second, about Article 63, the regulations of nominating bodies. You said there is only one set of guidelines. I don't think so. Any specified body can formulate their own adjudicating rules according to Article 63. They can also put together some code of practice, even the code of practice of the adjudicators. Judging from the bill, I understand that different bodies can put together their own guidelines. In Article 61, the Secretary can issue guidance or instructions to the specified bodies. If there are 10 specified bodies, they can publish 10 sets of guidelines. Maybe 70% of the contents are the same, while the details are completely different. Legally, there is no regulations regarding the publishing of guidelines. Then each body might have their own rules. When dispute arises, which set of guidelines shall we follow? People might just pick and choose whatever set of guidelines they prefer. Isn't it in violation with the objective of this bill? All that you want to do is to simplify things. If the Secretary is entitled to put together some binding guidelines, it will be much better because everybody have to comply with it. You said that you are now consulting the professional bodies. You want to receive a collective wisdom in order to put together guidelines. Your question is already very clear. 2 questions. Secretary, about the scope of this bill. You were asking about large-scale maintenance of the buildings. I have noted the comments of the members because even those with building plans, is falling under scope. But for residential units, if it is of a larger scale, can we also regulate this type of works? We have noted your comments. We will see how can we strike a better balance. Second, about the rules or the code of practice for the adjudicators. As mentioned, currently we have asked different professional bodies to help draft. At the end of the day, there will be only one set of guidelines and it has to be approved by the administration. They cannot decide on their own. Truly, the drafting of the bill is unclear about this intention. Well, in reality, the administration will have checks on this kind of guidelines. We will review the drafting of this bill. Next question is about the selection of specified bodies. So what kind of bodies are entitled to become part of the specified body in order to nominate an adjudicator? It is up to the administration to decide. It has to be reviewed by the administration, and it is also stipulated in the bill. With the list of specified bodies, then the claiming party has to agree upon the specified body who can nominate the adjudicators. Both parties has to agree. And they can only select from the list of specified body approved by the government. We have some very useful discussion today. Now we are much clearer about the intention of the administration regarding this bill. During the scrutiny of the bill, if we discover that the drafting has not fulfilled your intention, there will be adjustments. We can see that the Secretary is rather open. If necessary, we can further perfect the bill. There is a next meeting coming up in this room. Therefore, there will be no extension of time. I have some follow-up of works. Therefore, we cannot continue the discussion today. The next is Cheng Yanyu, Lok Han-man, and Lee Chen-kung, and Dennis Leung. And there are also requests of second rounds. We have to leave until the next meeting. Would the members consider to invite the public to express their views regarding this bill? We can allow for written submission or to organize for a public hearing. What is your take? Shall we organize for a public hearing? Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, Chair. We have discussed with the sector for many years regarding this bill. People have different points of views because they all speak from different perspectives. I'm inclined to organize for a public hearing because we can hear from the sector and learn more about the difficulties. To a certain extent, a public hearing can arouse the awareness in the sector. Mr. Kwok Wai-kung, I agree. Well, for the construction sector, it is difficult for them to put things into writings because there are complicated scenarios. It would be better for them to speak in person. Like other panels, we can submit some invitation list. It does not have to go fully public. If we have too many participants, then there will be a lot of submissions that we need to take care of. Yes, we will set up certain scope. We will send out invitations to certain groups of people. But members of public will be welcomed once we decided to organize for a public hearing. Mr. Andrew Lam, thank you, Chair. I agree with you. Well, because the secretary said that they will consider if the scope would extend to the maintenance of private housing. This is something that the general public needs to understand. Any other viewpoints? I think members generally agree to organize for a public hearing because it will affect not only the sector but also the general public. If that is the case, the Secretariat has already put together a date. Please reserve the morning of the 16th of July 2024 from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. This is a time period that we can use for a public hearing, according to the Secretariat. The notice will be published on the website of Legislative Council, inviting members of public to express their views. As customary, we will also notify the District Council. Mr. Long Han-pyo, can you repeat the date and time? The 16th of July, it is a Tuesday, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. There will be 4 hours of time. Secretariat also decided for our next meeting, which is the 9th of July. It's also a Tuesday. It will start from 2 p.m. We will have 2 hours of meeting. I think the secretary can also attend the meeting. For public hearing, it's 16th of July. It's a Tuesday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Next meeting of this BillsCom is the 9th of July. It's also a Tuesday. It starts from 2 p.m. We will continue to look into the policy regarding these bills. There is no other business. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, the administration.